Welcome back to the Multifamily Investor Playbook. I'm your host, Mark Faris. I'm here with my co host, John Makarewicz. So, we're going to be going over a headline that just came across our desk today. And here's how it goes. So, it's actually from Marcus and Millichap. And so, the Atlanta market is projected to rank second. So, second in the entire country for multifamily rent growth in 2026. So, that's this year. For give you guys context, we're mid March right now as we're doing and recording this. So, number two for rent growth in 26, 4.1% effective rent growth in 1 year, which is it's a really good number, especially being that after two consecutive years of rent decline. So rents have come down over the last 2 years, and what we're seeing is a bottoming happening right now. And now with the growth and the lack of new supply coming on, there's projected rent growth of 4.1% in 2026, which is number two in the entire country. So we're going to be breaking down why Atlanta, why we think that this market is great, and why we've taken down an asset here just recently, and we timed it perfectly based on the data that's coming out here today. John, it's good to be here with you.
Great to be here, Mark. And I think, it's worth kind of pausing just for a minute on like effective rent growth. Like, what are we really talking about? So, for example, we just bought a deal in Noonan and, you might say, well, gosh, if rents were declining, why would you buy in that market? Well, the reality is when we're talking about effective rent, we're talking about market rent, like what the rent should be if the property's operating at its peak, like kind of level, right? And so what happens is, and when there's a big supply wave that comes online, often there's so much competition for the same residents that, operators start giving concessions like 1 or 2 months free rent or discounted rent. And so, in other words, we bought deals over the last 2 years in markets that had projected flat rent growth, but we were still getting 6 and 8% rent growth, right? So there is a bit of a thing that you have to like, as you kind of learn more about this. And if you're investing with us, you've probably seen that already occur. So there is that operational discount that can occur where there's a bad operator and they're either A, not pushing rents or not like really earning that additional rent would be a better way to say it because they're not supplying enough value here. But when you see that headline, Mark, 4.1% rent growth in 2026, that just is a signal to your point that we bottomed out in Atlanta and we're on the upswing. And that is because the supply cliff has occurred. So 8,400 fewer units are projected to be delivered in 2026 as compared to 2025. That's roughly half of last year's pace. So that slow development pace in Atlanta, or I'm sorry, that is the slowest development pace in Atlanta in over a decade. So we're not talking about the peak of like, deliveries 2 years ago. This is over 10 years. So we're seeing fewer new inventory coming online than we have in 10 years. And, when we talk about Atlanta, Mark, I think it's important to pause and sort of talk about, we're saying Metro Atlanta, which is really like if you sat in the middle of downtown Atlanta, you can drive an hour in any direction and you're still considered to be in Metro Atlanta. Candidly, in some cases, you might drive an hour and a half, and some people might still call that Metro Atlanta. So we're going to dive into that a bit later in this podcast about why we really focus on the suburban markets. But in downtown and midtown, there's fewer than 600 units scheduled to open. Like that's just, I mean, I've never seen that I've been here my whole life. Multifamily starts dropped nearly 50%, and Atlanta and Charlotte together made up 40% of units absorbed across the entire Southeast in 2025. So we love Charlotte. We're keeping a close eye on Charlotte as a market to invest in. But Atlanta is where I live, and it's one that we're super excited to own more assets in, with our first being the Noonan deal. So a lot of opportunity in Atlanta, in a market we're going to be focused on pretty aggressively over the next coming years.
Yeah, and I think it's really important because a lot of times people will hear, "Oh, Atlanta," and sometimes you hear good things, sometimes you hear, not good things. And so, what's really important is, like Johnny had said, like an hour and a half, you could be driving and you're still in Metro Atlanta. Like
Yep.
Newton, for example, is about 30 minutes
Yeah.
south of Atlanta's airport, which is the largest airport in the entire world. When I say largest, they move the most amount of people through Atlanta. Like it's a major hub. When you look on the map, like it's smack dab pretty much in the middle of North America. And so for people that are traveling, that's really great. And so just going back to the market in Atlanta is so big, and there's so many different submarkets that's really important to analyze each of the submarkets. But we're talking more in general right now that there is a huge opportunity in that area because people are moving there based on affordability, based on the amount of jobs and based on the amount of rent that they're paying, that they can actually move there and keep more money in their pocket at the end of the day. And you know what? I mean, John, you're living there for a reason, right?
Yeah.
It's just there's a lot of really cool things that are going on in Atlanta. I remember visiting. I was visiting a church down there,
Mm.
North
North
Point,
Point.
with
Yeah.
Andy
Yeah.
Stanley, and we ended up going and visiting the original Coke factory,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
That's in Atlanta, right?
Yeah.
Coke.
Oh,
They
yeah.
is that's home base.
Born and raised here in Atlanta, Coca-Cola, man. That's an Atlanta product. That's right. We're proud of
Not that
Coke
I'm a
here.
huge like I drink it very often,
Probably
but the
20 years
point is,
since I've cracked a can, but
it's like Joanna will slap my head, and if I say I'm a Coke drinker, which I'm not, but
Yeah, yeah.
she's kind of trained me through the years. Is like that's not good. But the point is there's a lot of things like that in Atlanta that is just like it's a really cool place to not only visit but to live. I mean the seasons as well, John. Why don't you talk a little bit about the seasons and how that works? Because people from up north they think of Atlanta, they're not really sure, and maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I'll get to the weather, but it is interesting because, I've heard some of that feedback from investors. And I would say that number one, this is not a political podcast, but I think Atlanta kind of got on the radar and became a political sort of like hot spot, if that makes sense, because when Joe Biden won the 2020 election, he won in Georgia because of Atlanta. It wasn't Georgia, but it was, Atlanta's growing population tends to be younger, more diverse, and tends to vote more Democratic. And so, it became sort of this thing where there was a lot of like, oh, the crime and all this stuff. And it's like, I've lived in Atlanta my whole life. I've never, experienced any crime. Like, I mean, one time when I lived in Midtown, my car got broken into, but I think that happens just about anywhere in an in-town market. So, for me, you've got a large concentration of Fortune 500 companies here. I mean, we mentioned Coca-Cola, but the Home Depot's headquartered and founded here. UPS, Newell Rubbermaid. I mean, I can keep going. So just massive companies are choosing to be formed here, and partly it's because of the climate. Where I'm sitting today, it's unseasonably cold. We're recording this, I think, on the 17th of March, but tomorrow it's projected to be like 24 degrees Celsius. And we're in March, so we get like kind of a gray winter, but maybe it snows every couple of years and it's just for like 3 hours and the kids get excited and then it's gone the next day. So a very, I would say, good climate. Yeah, it can get a little hot and humid in the summertime, but Mark, I've been down to Naples in May and almost passed out from the humidity. And that's like August for a couple weeks for us in Atlanta. So there's this phenomenon that's actually occurring where a lot of Eastern people, like say from New York, New Jersey, and Boston, relocate to Florida, and then the weather maybe is a little too hot for them. So we call them halfbacks, where they kind of land in Atlanta or Raleigh or Charlotte. And so, I love the weather here. And, I can keep going. We've got an incredible, arts, culture, music. And even beyond that, we're one of, I think, 8 or 9 markets in America that's Michelin rated. So we have some of the best restaurants in America here. So I'm biased because I live here, I think, but I love it. I really do. Great music, great art. The film industry's big presence here, and I haven't had any celebrity sightings, but I have friends that have met Josh Brolin at Starbucks and just hanging around. So it's a happening place, and so I think the headlines sometimes are a little deceiving. Now, I will say we don't invest in-town Atlanta. Number one, it's a lot of high rises or like 1930s and 40s vintage, aged apartment buildings that for us just have too much risk associated with them. Or once again, a high rise is just a bigger project that we're not, willing or wanting to take down. But yeah, I love the market and big believer in it. And here's why. At the end of the day, like the population and migration, it's like firepower. I mean, Atlanta is the third fastest growing metro in the entire United States. That's from the U.S. Census Bureau. That's not some made up statistic. Added approximately 75,100 new residents between 23 and 24 alone, which was the eighth highest nationally. It's one of the top 10 metros for in-migration over the past 5 years, right alongside Dallas, Tampa, Charlotte, and Raleigh. And well-located Atlanta apartments will remain a high priority target for investors. It's very competitive. This is from the Marcus and Millichap report. It's one of the most active buyer markets for apartment buildings in the U.S. Um, and I'll briefly just kind of like highlight Noonan a little bit just to give some clarity. If you didn't invest in the Noonan deal, I will say you missed an opportunity. Coweta County, which is the county Noonan sits in, specifically has had 26.75% population growth since 2010 and projected to add another 65,000 residents by 2060. And that's from the Georgia Office of Planning and Budget. So there are these little like suburban markets where if you can get in at the right timing on the front end, you're just going to be so well positioned to capitalize on that massive population growth that's occurring.
Yeah, that Noonan deal started so strong, John.
Yeah.
That property management team that, you put together is, they're just second to none. Like what the quality of people there and the total culture shift since we've taken possession of that asset is pretty amazing to see.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I'm
so
thinking
yeah,
about
good job on
Jeremy,
that.
our maintenance guy who when it was your first time meeting him, I had met him, obviously a handful of times prior, but you asked him how it's going. He said, the first step was just building the trust with the residents, going to them one by one. Is there anything outstanding the prior group didn't take care of for you? And let's add it to the list and get it done. And we received reports that there were some maintenance items that residents were waiting over 2 years to get resolved. Like, for example, you might think this is a small thing, but
Previous ownership with the
previous
previous
ownership. Yeah,
ownership.
that's right.
Yeah.
Just to
Yeah.
be clear. So
Yeah.
previous ownership. So this may seem small, but somebody had an internal light switch, but when they would turn it on, it would turn off the exterior like breezeway lights. And I'm like, no, that's a big deal. Like if that guy just accidentally now other residents can't see to their unit. And so we fixed that, we heard about it. It was an easy fix. 2 years that person was waiting on that to be resolved from that prior owner. So I mentioned population, but the job growth is a bigger factor here as well. So Atlanta projected to add 19,000 new jobs in 2026 alone, which is the fourth highest gain in the U.S. That comes from Marcus and Millichap. And office using employment, in fact, you're seeing a lot of that happening where offices are back to being well utilized. So that just means more corporations are coming in, taking down that space and adding more jobs. And Metro Atlanta job growth has nearly doubled the national average since early 2020. So every year we're just beating the national average by double, right? So it's just one of those places where, because of the affordability, the presence of Delta, which I failed to mention earlier, but Coca-Cola, Home Depot, UPS, Microsoft, and Google have major campuses here. We got Norfolk Southern, Amazon with a major presence here. And then we have Georgia State University, many regional smaller colleges and universities, the Savannah College of Art and Design, which, yes, is also in Savannah, but has a huge campus here. So just there's a young, energetic, group of people. University of Georgia is a top 20 college in the United States, just about an hour and a half away. So that's just feeding this job growth engine, right?
Yeah, for sure. And so this is where, I mean, median household income as well is higher than the US average as well at 87,000. That school that you were talking about from the graduates in Atlanta produces 40,000 graduates annually. And so if they produce them there, and this is one thing I've seen Florida do really well at too, is they attract a lot of talent by giving away different scholarships through the state. And they attract, so if they go to school there, there's a good chance they're going to stay there and continue to work in the area. So 40,000, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Not only that, John, so it's pretty exciting. In 2026, you have the World Cup. So Atlanta's one of the U.S. host cities as well, which I'm sure you're going to get front row seats there at all the games.
I would love to, but I'd have
You
to
check the
mortgage.
pricing on
Yeah,
that?
I'd have
That's
to
like
mortgage my house to
unbelievable.
get a couple tickets for that. So yeah, likely not going to happen. Maybe back in the old days at Mark Spain Real Estate, we had a lot of connections. I'd get some free tickets here and there. But yeah, I'm not spending $5,000. I'll watch it on my big screen TV at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
failed to mention Georgia Tech as well is based right downtown, which is one of the major technology and engineering schools in the United States. So that's where you're seeing Google and Microsoft and Apple come to this market to take advantage of a lot of those young graduates coming out of school there. So yeah, it's a great market, despite sometimes an occasional headline you might see, which once again, my view is somewhat politically motivated. But all that to say, why did we choose Noonan? We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. We've done a whole episode on Noonan, but I really want to dig into it to really talk about why we like these suburban markets. So for me, having lived here and seen it happen, is over the past 10 years or so, you've seen this major trend where the cities are taking more control and in some cases annexing more land from the county. And where I live in Alpharetta is such a great example of it. And so they're doing special purpose taxes where they're raising, maybe for a period of time, 1% more in sales tax. but then they're going in and revitalizing their cities. So like downtown Noonan has seen that. Downtown Alpharetta, where I live, has seen that. So, I used to have to go into Atlanta 10, 15 years ago to get like a really great, like if I wanted to go to a steakhouse. Now, like three of the best steakhouses in Atlanta are within 10 minutes of where I live. And so just the community is starting to come together in a lot of these suburban markets where, if you live in Alpharetta and work in Alpharetta, you really never have to leave, right? And Noonan is very similar to that. So we touched on the population growth. The median household income, as you said, in Noonan is $95,000 and it's growing rapidly. So adding, 1 to 2% in population every single year. And suburban Atlanta in particular is outperforming the urban core, which we sort of touched on, but 70% of Atlanta multifamily transactions are occurring in the suburban markets. Class B assets, are holding occupancy higher than even the more stabilized Class A assets. So, that we did an episode recently on the aging demographic, the baby boomers. The 65 to 74 age group is the fastest growing renter demographic in Metro Atlanta. So we're well positioned to take advantage of that as well. So, bottom line is we're a big fan of Atlanta.
Yeah, 100%. So again, to recap, affordability, you have jobs there, you have quality of life there. And at the end of the day, it's just there's not a lot of new builds coming and being delivered on the open market to absorb this kind of demand, which is going to push rents up. I think the real estate is really simple at the end of the day, John.
Yeah.
John, there's supply and demand, right? You have people coming in, they need a place to live. That's why we love the assets so much, because people always need a place with a roof over their head, right? They need
Yeah.
to be able to sleep with a roof over their head. And at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. We're picking the best markets to be able to deploy capital in, and then from there, we're just doing a really great job at building community and looking after people and making sure we're running an operational efficient asset at the end of the day, which drives overall returns and happier investors and happier John and Mark as well, running the deal with their Faris Capital amazing talented team. So if you do want to learn a little bit more about how you can partner with us on our next opportunity, you can go to fulloutinvesting.com. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can go ahead and subscribe to the channel and share it with any other high net worth investor that you think will benefit from it. Thanks for tuning in to the Multifamily Investor Playbook. We love and believe in you guys. Keep dreaming and investing big.